Welcome everybody to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call. We have first call for 2020. Glad you're here. It looks like we're going to have a very strong turnout, and I'm glad to start the year out properly. We have a good presentation, I think, and we're eager to get started. So we're going to dive right in. We're going to start with an overview from Melody about the work in Congress and what we've learned so far. And where we're going to be going in 2020, and some of the things we'll ask you to help on. And as you know, this is all this stuff becomes quite vital, and we've been effective because of your participation. So we'll dive into there. Today's call is going to be devoted to tenant and rental issues. This is a sizable piece of the counseling world, but I know that many of you tell us that you would like to do more, and it's a challenging field because there's really not very much available funding. It does sound like I've got somebody who's not on mute right now. We're getting a little bit of background noise, so if they could take care of that, that would be great. And I think on the rental side, we will probably do a series of these over the next couple of years and try to highlight opportunities and models that might work. And we'll dive in today on, well, actually, we'll start out with an overview on the Eviction Crisis Act, which is federal legislation, and it's an opportunity to bring these issues to bear from a federal perspective that has bipartisan support. We'll talk a little bit about what's in there, and we circulated a link to the description. This is an opportunity to have a policy impact on this. And most of the call will be devoted to the program in Cleveland with people working in a really innovative program that helps people faced with eviction to get them into the proper resources and reroute how they what the outcomes might be. And I think, as we've talked about in the past, and we circulated in the past some information about the book Eviction, and have had some discussions about this, the eviction triggers kind of a landslide of problems for families, and really creates a very negative spiral of poverty, and intervening in that can mean stabilizing families, but also helping them get into helping them stay out of long-term poverty situations. So we think this is vital work, and they've got a model that's helpful what they're doing in Cleveland. And we are, and after that, we're going to do a quick check-in on our typical pictures worth 1,000 words. We'll have a membership piece, and we will be on and we'll be, looks like we have lost the picture, and we're going to get it back. It is still on? Okay, good. Okay. So good. So I lost the picture, so hopefully it's working for you. And we'll do a quick plug on membership, and we'll have a call in 2 weeks again. So with that quick note, let's go to Melody.
Thank you, Bruce. And Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Just a really quick recap of last year, which was a really successful advocacy year for us and our members. Thank you again, everyone who worked closely with us and reached out to their legislators and joined us sign-on letters, essentially working to encourage housing counseling in Congress and make the case for increased funding. As we sent out previously, last year when the House and Senate went into Congress, fortunately the President did sign that conference resolution into law. We have housing counseling assistance at $53 million for fiscal year 2020. While it's a small bump, it's a win for us because, as I said in our previous call on December 19th, originally what the push was going to be was $45 million in conference, and thanks to your hard work and making the case, in particular to Chairman Price and Ranking Member Diaz-Balart on the House T-HUD Appropriations Subcommittee, they really asked for a $3 million increase from the $50 million for fiscal year 2019, and we got it. So that is really great. But there's so much more that we can do. We now know very much so, more than ever, that housing counseling assistance funding is under threat, that people do not understand the nuances of the program, how and why it's funded the way it is, and why there is such a great need for funding in the field, and why we have to use that information to ask for a true increase. And so our plan for 2020 is that we plan to meet with and work really closely with House Appropriations staff this month to discuss in advance of the White House budget request, which comes out in February, fiscal year 2021 strategy, to see where and how we can get Congress, essentially, I'll be very blunt, get Congress to understand the program better and thus understand why more funding is necessary. Me and Bruce, this month, we are meeting with Chairman Price's committee staff and his personal staff to sort of go over what we think is a good idea for planning purposes, whether we need a sign-on letter, the number that we should be requesting so we can send that number out to the field, and sort of just design our overall vision for this fiscal year strategy. In addition, I'm also preparing a list of every single House and Senate office and their individual internal appropriations requests from the public. So essentially last year, as some of you may have seen, we sent out individual sign-on letters from each member of Congress, basically asking for the then requested number of 60 million in the House and Senate for fiscal year 2020. And while that was effective, I believe, in raising awareness of the program to the Congress, we want to see more individual targeting. So essentially, some offices might say we want this Google form, others may say we want a letter with very particular questions answered from just their constituents. And so, as you can imagine, with 535 separate offices in Congress of legislators, that's a very complex process. So we want to get ahead of that, ahead of the budget request from the White House, so that when it does come out, we can immediately start sending this out and see which offices are more, open to having conversations, where we can find new champions possibly, know where the landmines are, and try to make the case for them in a more efficient and targeted way. And so that's what we're doing for appropriations. Around just different housing priorities in Congress, around legislation, right now the focus seems to be very, very specific. We had really good conversations last year, end of the year, with Senate Banking as well as the House Financial Services Committee, and their priorities seem to be around three primary things. So homelessness, huge issue across the country, both rural and urban and suburban, whether it's sheltered or unsheltered, and what does that mean for the country? It's a public health crisis, it's a social service crisis, it targets so many different facets of the fabric of America, so it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, it's a bipartisan issue, and so yes, that's a huge issue. They have eviction as well. I know that there is a hearing coming up on the Financial Services Committee in the House on January 14th around homelessness, gentrification, and eviction, where they want to focus on solutions around affordable housing and ensuring that people can stay in their homes. And they'll be discussing two bills to sort of find ways to address that, the Ending Homelessness Act, as well as the Housing and Infrastructure Act, both sponsored by Chairwoman Waters, and we'll be following those bills very closely. And then finally, just the housing affordability crisis. Home values are skyrocketing, property taxes are skyrocketing, and rents are skyrocketing. Even in places that are more rural, if a family only makes $25,000 a year, they can't afford a $1,200 rent. And so those are the things that Congress will be focusing on this Congress. At least that's what we've been told so far. We hope to work really closely with both chambers and both committees on finding areas of collaboration and how we can include housing counseling in this pivotal moment nationally around housing issues and solutions. And so you'll be getting more information from me shortly. But that is our focus so far this January. And just keep an eye on your inbox, because I will definitely be sending a lot of information. What I hope to do this year is just to keep all of our members very much updated on what's going on in the Hill. I'll be sending you guys summaries of what's happening with these committees. If any of the members ask questions that are pertinent to the work that we do, and hopefully we find new champions. So we're really excited for 2020, and I hope you guys will join us with that. Thanks. I'll send it back to Bruce.
Thank you, Melody. And for you veterans of the process, the key thing coming up in February will be these programmatic request letters that House and Senate members send to Appropriations Committee. We have to get Housing Counseling to be on that list with many of these people, and we did a very good job last year, and it really comes from your asking your representatives and your senators to make the requests. We'll focus especially in the Senate on Republican requests because that's most critical for us and where we're having the biggest problems. But everybody matters on this one, and we really need to do well. When we met with Representative Price, who's the chair of the TS subcommittee, specifically always cite that these requests are critical. Price is a deep supporter of our work, and it's just great out of North Carolina. Has deep relationships with many counseling groups, and thanks to the support they do. But they do need to hear from their committee members, and what we need is we need to get the rank and file who aren't on the committee to be writing and making these requests and making sure that housing counseling is on the list. So part of the whole political process, and we start over again for 2020, for fiscal year 2021. All right. Well, with that, let's move on to some active legislation that has just surfaced, and this is the Eviction Crisis Act. Exciting because it's got bipartisan support. Senator Portman in Ohio and Senator Bennett in Colorado have supported it. We have Rob Finn from the Center for Community Progress to give us a high level on what the bill includes and what he thinks its impact will be. Rob, welcome to Leaders in Housing.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thanks everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Rob Finn. I'm the Director of Policy and Research for the Center for Community Progress. The Eviction Crisis Act, there should be a link that was both sent around with the agenda, and I think there's a link in the current chat box if you want to peruse the page that Senator Bennett's staff has put together, which will largely mirror the way I talk about it. The bill is sponsored by Senator Bennett, Senator Portman from Ohio, in addition to Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio and Senator Todd Young from Indiana. So we do have 2 R's and 2 D's in the Senate. It's been referred to the Senate Banking Committee, and it has essentially 3 main parts. The first part of the bill focuses on improving data and analysis on evictions. There is, I believe there has been a lot of connection to Matthew Desmond's eviction lab in the development of this legislation. And it recognizes the fact that an enormous amount of research is missing and is needed to understand across states how evictions are working, and to create a national database to standardize how data is collected and to track evictions in order to make better decisions about policy. So this would fund the creation of that database and research that's needed. It would establish a federal advisory committee on that eviction research to make recommendations, as well as policy and practice recommendations about how to mitigate the consequences and prevent altogether certain evictions. And it also authorizes funding for a comprehensive study to analyze landlord-tenant law across states and assess the different factors in different types of landlord-tenant geographies, urban, rural, and suburban. That's the first sort of data and analysis focus of the bill. The second large segment of the bill is aimed at reducing preventable addictions and mitigating eviction-related consequences. So this comes in sort of 2 parts. It is looking to create funding for, and I think this would be done through sort of a competitive process to establish an emergency assistance fund, or to assist states that may already have emergency assistance funds. This, I think, stems from the well-recited and sort of disturbing data point that was put out by the Eviction Lab that they studied 22 states in 2014 through 2016 data, and the median judgment for an eviction case was approximately $1,200. So the aim of this emergency assistance fund is to assist states in establishing either grant or bridge loan programs to help stave off imminent crisis level evictions, particularly when so many of them are for such small dollar amounts. 75% of the funding that's dedicated to this sort of fund would go towards those types of programs, and then 25% of it would go towards other programs aimed at either helping tenants find new housing, case management and social work, and other forms of public support. There's also a component of that segment of the bill that encourages state and local governments to utilize community courts that can more sort of capably work with landlords and tenants and assess the specific needs, rather than just putting them on a regular docket. And there's been research that suggests there's some success in that community court model for landlord-tenant cases. And then this section of the bill also doesn't give any funding, but expresses full support for the full funding of Legal Services Corporation, as recent developments in the field have shown. Places like New York and Philadelphia have, by law, made essentially a right to representation for tenants in landlord-tenant court, which obviously will involve full and meaningful funding towards Legal Services Corporation to provide those lawyers to tenants. And this is looking to try and build some momentum, I think, off of that movement. The third segment of the bill has to do with tenant screening reports, and it would require that tenant screening reports, similar to credit reports, that they would be made available to tenants, so that when their report is pulled, they would have an opportunity to review them to determine whether there are any inaccuracies that need to be corrected, because we all know how important those tenant screening reports are and what consequences they have for tenants, particularly tenants for low and moderate income tenants who may have some type of history of legal action involving tenancy. So it requires that screening reports be made available to applicants. It also requires the screening agencies to remove from a tenant screening report any court action that a tenant prevails in. So I think the status quo for years has been that even if a tenant is brought to court and succeeds, that still shows up as them having been having had a legal action for eviction filed against them in court, which is something that a landlord can and most often sees as a negative in that tenant's portfolio. So so those are the three main segments of this bill: that it would fund national data collection and analysis. It would create a funding mechanism for emergency assistance and other forms of assistance to tenants who are facing eviction. And it would address some of the problems and issues that we have seen over the years in how tenant screening reports are handled. And I have just to anticipate some questions some folks might have. I do not have any information yet on whether there is a companion bill in the House. So I'm not sure if that is in the works at the moment. And with respect to the actual status of the legislation, it was introduced, I believe, before the holidays and referred to the Senate Banking Committee, and that's where it will be considered.
Excellent, Rob. Thank you very much. Is your sense that, do we have any intel about in the Senate, will it attract more sponsors, and has it got legs at this moment, or are we really just at the initial stage?
I think we're at the initial stage. I don't know. I know it was my understanding that it was Portman and Bennett as the original co-sponsors. So I don't think Brown and Young were the original co-sponsors. So I think they have since joined, but I could be wrong on that. So there's at least some them being in support of this bill is not any type of real surprise, given what we know about the fact that they do have an understanding about housing. So I don't know what degree, I know there are a lot of sort of legislative proposals floating around in Congress, particularly in the Senate, relating to housing. So I don't know to what extent there is some behind the scenes coordination going on about trying to maybe have them all considered rather than have them sort of be considered piece by piece. So that may happen. I know Senator Hassan has a bill that she had proposed that was also, directly related to eviction issues. So we'll definitely have to wait and see.
And for the housing counseling programs, so the money that's set aside, 75% of it goes to direct services for the family facing eviction, so paying essentially for back rent or other things directly there. And the other 25% can go for other sort of social services. And we think that an eligible activity would be housing counseling. We'll try to encourage that they maybe make that a little more specific as well, but that may be something useful for groups to be aware of, and a vital role that we'll get to in a minute for how to do this work. Good. Well, I think this is there anything else you want to add, Rob? This is very helpful.
No, I would say you would definitely, it isn't explicitly referenced with respect to housing counseling, but it's certainly within the spirit of everything the legislation is trying to do with respect to smoothing the transition for tenants between housing, particularly if they're coming out of an eviction, and connecting tenants to other available services and social services that they might need, mental health and behavioral health services, and other programs to help tenants really rebound. So I always consider it a danger to assume it would go without saying that that counseling would be a part of that, but it certainly should be. So I would encourage you guys to reach out to maybe Senator Bennett's staff and just make sure that is part of what ends up in the final passed version if this goes anywhere.
Right, we're on it, and we already talked to Portman a little bit about this last fall when it was still in the making of the oven. So we'll definitely follow up on that. And I always circulated the link to it. You can just Google Eviction Crisis Act. You'll get there a really terrific summary and a very high quality web page on all this, including the text of the bill. Thanks, Rob. And let's move on to what's happening in Cleveland. So and actually just one thing I'll go quick. I know we're having some audio problems and not having perfect audio. We will definitely deal with the webinar about what happens here, but hopefully it's temporary and hopefully you can hear well enough, and we will work with it to make sure this doesn't happen again. All right, Ellie.
Hi, thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody, and Happy New Year. Interesting to hear about this new Eviction Crisis Act, and it came, we brought Rob in because it was kind of a perfect way to highlight our first innovations in housing counseling for 2020. We're going to hear from CHN Housing Partners in Cleveland. They're a housing counseling agency that's having a lot of success providing counseling services to tenants. So we'll have Kate Carden, who's the Director of Financial Mobility Programs at CHN Housing Partners, and she's going to be joined by Andrew Tucson, the Director of Basic Needs at United Way of Greater Cleveland. So Kate, take it away.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Our first slide, we were going to have Andrew from United Way review just a snapshot of Cleveland, so the demographics that we're working with and things like that.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you. We'll just breeze through this slide, but I thought that it was important to give folks some context about the climate here in Cleveland. And so you'll see that there's 3 columns in both of these tables. I'm just going to focus on Cleveland, but Cuyahoga County, which is the county in which Cleveland resides, is there as sort of a reference point. And as we're talking about housing counseling, there are just a couple of things that I'm going to point out. You'll see that in the race row that just over half of Cleveland's population identifies as Black, according to the census. Then on the line down, you'll see that the median household income in Cleveland is just over $27,000. However, if you pull out just Black households, you'll see about an $8,000 dip in specifically Black household income. And so that's really important when we're thinking about the kind of folks that we're trying to support through this programming and some of the financial constraints and realities for what they're dealing with. Just another not high note, but the poverty rates in Cleveland are significantly higher than in lots of points in the country. Unfortunately, we are number one in having the highest child poverty rate of any major city in the nation. So more than half of our young people under the age of 18 are living in poverty. And so that's another piece of context that I think is important as we're thinking about some of the things that Kate and United Way we're all trying to collectively move the needle on. The bottom part is specific about housing. Rents are significantly lower here. I mean, when I lived in Chicago more than 10 years ago, I was paying 3 times the average monthly rent in Cleveland, and that was a decade ago. And then you'll also see number of units and percent of those that are rent burdened in our community. So again, just a really quick snapshot to give you some perspective on what Cleveland looks like, and then I'll kick it back over to Kate to talk about some of the programs.
Sure. Next slide, please. So CHN Housing Partners, we are an affordable housing developer and provider of housing services established in 1981 in Cleveland, Ohio. Our mission is to leverage the power of affordable and stable housing to change lives and improve communities. So at CHN, we really believe that housing is the platform, and if you are able to obtain and maintain safe and stable housing, everything else will come from that, with housing as the platform. So we are really big on collaboration. We work with a lot of other local nonprofits, government entities, financial institutions, and now increasingly hospital systems to try and reach the folks that might be in need of our services. Right now, our primary geographic focus is Northeast Ohio, but we have expanded that because of our experience with development of homes, work that we're doing with weatherization and utility assistance, things like that. We've expanded to cities like Detroit, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh to work collaboratively with other housing developers and government institutions and nonprofits in those locations. Next slide, please. So CHN was initially founded and formerly known as Cleveland Housing Network in 1981, as I had mentioned, looking to increase affordable housing options in the city of Cleveland. So in 1987, shortly after the low-income housing tax credit was introduced, CHN used that as a tool to bring affordable housing to Cleveland. But what makes our program special and different from a lot of other LIHTC programs is that we use it as a tool to build single-family homes. A lot of other LIHTC projects are multifamily, so you're generally dealing with rentals in an apartment building setting. So since 1987, what we've accomplished in the city is we've developed over 2,000 properties. Of those, we've sold over 1,000 to our own lease purchase residents. When we sell a home to our resident, the average or median sales price is $19,750. And so while a resident is renting from us, their average rent is right around $550 to $600. In year 16, so once a resident has gone through our 15-year tax credit compliance period and they're eligible to purchase the home from us, we want their mortgage payment thereon to be equal or less to the rent that they've been paying to us. We refer to it as our equivalency principle, where we really feel as though a resident, if they've been able to pay their rent and maintain that on a good basis for years, then we're confident that they would then be able to pay a mortgage payment equal to or less than that. So in 2014, we decided to really deepen our relationship with our own lease purchase residents, not only because we felt they deserved it and it was warranted, but lending changed so much. So prior to the foreclosure crisis, it was pretty easy for our residents to be able to go to a traditional lender and obtain financing to purchase a home from CHN once they reached year 16 or the end of that compliance period. After the crisis, though, not only because of changes within lending and Dodd-Frank, but also just with their own economics, it was harder for one of our residents to purchase a home. So we decided to build what we call Family Success, which is an in-depth counseling model that we use with our CHN residents, where we're providing counseling for up to 15 years through both one-on-one individual financial capabilities coaching, as well as group education. Next slide, please. And so in the past, throughout the history of us selling homes to our residents, over 500 in the last 5 years have taken title, and 99% are successful as homeowners. So we continue to follow up with residents after they buy a home from us to ensure things are going well, that they're still living in the home, and 99% of them are. So how we bring residents to us is we coordinate financial capabilities counseling or rental counseling with their lease renewal. So in their lease, residents are advised that as part of the recertification or lease renewal process, that they will also be meeting with a housing counselor. And we're seeing those residents at a minimum once per year. We try and get them in twice per year. And in those cases, the leases do stipulate that they would be coming in every 6 months. So since 2014, when we began this counseling, we've seen our residents reduce over $1.5 million of debt, and that's satisfied debt, so that does include things like disputes, charge-offs, items that they're able to settle. We've seen them increase savings by an average of $400 per household. They've improved their credit by an average of 51 points. And one thing that we really emphasize with our own residents is how can we help them access better banking products and better lending products so that they're not paying such high interest rates and they're able to really navigate the banking system. And to date, we've seen our residents access over 600 lower cost mainstream financial products. We're really hoping that we can work with folks to develop emergency savings, get credit that would allow them to obtain maybe small dollar lending so that they're not accessing things like payday loans that are a little bit dangerous for them financially. And so with this program especially, we've taken a very data-driven approach. In 2017, all of our housing counseling programs moved from Counselor Max to Homekeeper, which is a HUD-approved application on the Salesforce platform. And within that platform, what we've done is created financial snapshots. So every time a resident comes in, they renew their lease, they meet with a housing counselor, and then we take a snapshot of where they are financially at that point in time. And so we're looking at things like credit score, debt to income, improvements with their income. And then we're able to look then out over time longitudinally with all of our residents, progress over time. And so that's been really helpful for us as we apply for funding. Most of this program is funded through local foundations, and we've done a great job at really telling our story through the data that we're capturing from our residents during these appointments. And so we will now move back over to Andrew and get into another rental counseling program that we've started here in Cleveland. So next slide, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the Seymour Institute United Way partnership that has led to the creation of the Family Stability Initiative, which CHN facilitates. And that is specific to renters. So we're really looking at tenants and stabilizing families by keeping them in their units. And so the Seymour Institute provides resources, funding, and technical assistance across the nation with the overarching goal really to stabilize families and their housing in order to promote academic achievement and keep children in their schools of origin, because we know that eviction and housing instability, all of the ripple effects that can have on a family and especially on a child. And so they utilize a collective impact approach. So they completely understand that there's no one right way or one right path to get to housing and family stability. The Seymour Institute was officially established in 2011, and today they provide resources in more than 50 cities across the country. What's unique is that in all of those cities, the funding is directed through the local United Way. And from what I've heard the Seymours talk about, their theory is that United Ways are the experts and have such a vast network of partnerships in their own communities that it's more efficient to funnel the dollars through United Way so that United Ways can leverage and work with those partners versus having the Seymour Institute, go across the country and identify those partners themselves. So United Way and CHN Housing Partners, we began our local partnership in 2014 specific to the Family Stability Initiative. And just this last year, we added the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland to that partnership as well. And so if you could go to the next slide. And so, I'm going to talk a little bit about philosophy, and then Kate will get back to some of the nuts and bolts. But, we really believe that that there is a power in partnership. We can always achieve more collectively with all of our different expertise and lenses than we could ever accomplish on our own. But we know that it's time intensive, that's relationship driven, and that often, the most precious resource of any organization, we could debate whether it's money or whether it's time. And we completely understand and invest ourselves in the time that it takes to leverage and develop partnerships, because again, we think that leveraging everybody's expertise is going to amplify our impact that much more. And that's really how we've approached the Family Stability Initiative with CHN and Legal Aid. And we believe that, as I'll talk a little bit more, that really is what it spurs innovation and creativity. It's been so great to be in meetings with Kate and some folks from Legal Aid. And as a social worker myself, the depth and breadth of the conversation that we have around the lens of housing stability and tenant assistance is so much more robust, I think, than if any of us took our individual expertise to really try to address this issue locally. So if you could go to the next slide. So really the basics of how this is structured, again, from the United Ways lens, is that family and housing stability is achieved when multiple things intersect to create, a supportive environment. And so CHN takes on the flexible rental assistance and the financial coaching to make sure that that aspect of a family's life is receiving the supports that it needs. And United Way, through 211 and through its network, also helps to provide and support Kate and her team's case management with the additional community connections that we know will address families' diverse needs. Because when a family needs rental assistance, it's not just that one challenge that they're experiencing. It's often then related to income or employment or mental health or substance abuse, and only addressing one of those things is not going to lead to the long-term stability that we're hoping for. The third circle is something that has happened very recently. In September of 2019, Cleveland City Council passed a local ordinance providing a right to counsel for families in Cleveland Housing Court. And so Cleveland became the fourth city to explicitly have a right to counsel on the books. And the reason that these connections and that partnership is so important is that as I've worked more with legal aid and Kate, it's been really clear that quick, efficient emergency rental assistance can be the make or break when a lawyer is trying to negotiate on behalf of a client with the landlord. If the landlord knows that there is a check coming and that there's that commitment there, they are much more open to keeping that tenant in their unit and maintaining that housing stability. And so we have some public resources here, as many communities do, that are funneled through our county, but oftentimes those can take 30 plus days for a tenant to be approved for, whereas we know that housing court often operates on a week, 2 weeks in terms of their timeline. So leveraging CHN and legal aid to tie that relationship up stronger so that the rental assistance from CHN is provided to the new tenants that are receiving legal assistance in housing court. So trying to create a closed loop to best support families and generating and creating housing stability. So if you could go to the next slide. So as this work has evolved, there's really 3 overarching goals, and that's to stabilize the housing for renting families in Cleveland, to provide flexible assistance, whether that means catching them up on their emergency rental assistance or using those dollars flexibly to help them secure more sustainable, more appropriate housing. So if that's partial moving expenses, if that's a security deposit, whatever the case may be, again, the goal being ultimately to stabilize housing. And then the third goal, which is the newest, is that ensuring that tenants who are eligible under the ordinance that City Council passed have access and are provided with legal representation, preferably before their first court date. And with that, I think I'm kicking it back to Kay to talk about some of the outcomes that we've achieved together.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So here locally, the Family Stability Initiative focuses on families living within the city of Cleveland that have school-age children at home. So at its kind of heart or core, what FSI is really trying to do is to bring some stability to families when they have school-age children, because we see within our school districts that children oftentimes start and end the school year in different schools because they had to move maybe due to an eviction or another type of housing instability. And so we're working directly with families that have children, not just at our district schools, but we will work with parochial and charter schools as well. And if you could go to the next slide, I'll review some of our outcomes, but the nuts and bolts of the program, folks are connected to us through our local 211, other social service agencies, and then through our other internal programs. CHN currently sees right over 30,000 families per year through some other utility assistance programs that we have here. And so we've marketed our program pretty broadly, but we tend to see that programs that we've already integrated with are where we're getting these referrals. We can provide families up to $1,250 to help them pay delinquent rent. We can also help with security deposits and first month's rent. We do see a lot of folks that are trying to transition from a situation where maybe things weren't so great in their current rental to somewhere a little bit better. And so when they come in, we're providing really in-depth financial counseling and social service case management. So we have social workers on staff, but we are going through things like a spending plan and a credit report to really ensure that long-term sustainability is achievable for them. And so when we're working with a family and their landlord has agreed to accept the assistance from us, we can then process direct financial assistance that goes directly to the landlord. And so far, since 2014, we've been able to serve over 700 families in that capacity. When we look at kind of the family makeup, those 700 families also have 1,400 children. And so again, we're really trying to keep kids stable and in their school of origin so that they're not losing any of their learning. And the social connections that they're able to make at that school. Of those 700 families, we've seen over 600 of them improve their housing stability. We use a tool in this program called the Arizona Self-Sufficiency Matrix. So it is a tool that has 18 domains, and each domain goes from a level of 1, which is in crisis, to a 5, which is thriving. So when you're looking at the housing domain, a 1 would be they are homeless, and a 5 would be they're great, they don't need a subsidy, they're able to afford their housing. And so we're able to track our family's progress over time. With the Arizona Self-Sufficiency Matrix, we also look at things like income over time, education, access to community supports, and health care, to really understand what is that family going through when they first come to us. And we really want to look at the family's resiliency and how they're able to improve some of those metrics over time. And then since 2014, we've provided over $350,000 in direct financial assistance. Most of that has gone directly to landlords to prevent evictions. We see our clients needing, on average, right around $800, but we do go up to that $1,250 amount, because if someone owes just 2 months of rent, that's really the amount of money that you're needing to bring them current. Right now, we're serving just over 250 families per year. We do anticipate that growing as the right to counsel work that is happening in Cleveland grows. I know that in the first year, Legal Aid is hoping to see, at least over 1,000 families in housing court who would generally be eligible for this program. In Cleveland, the right to counsel work does stipulate that families in Cleveland have at least 1 child and have an income less than 100% of the federal poverty level. And so we work very collaboratively with the Legal Aid Society, with our local housing court, and then other agencies or groups that we know these folks might be reaching out to in other capacities. So for example, we've developed really strong partnerships with some of our local community health centers and hospital systems, knowing that because that family might be having a health crisis, it could potentially result in them not being able to pay their rent that month. And so we try and work really hard to be present in those places so that families are able to access our services, from wherever, whatever partner they're working with. And it really helps eliminate some of the stress that families are going through at that point in time. And so next slide, and Andrew, back to you.
All right, and I'm going to wrap it up. I will be brief out of respect for time. We want to make sure that we get some questions, but if you could go to the next slide. All right, you're already there. Sorry. So some of the things that we found to be effective, because United Way is both an organization that fundraises and also provides funding. And so this is really sort of specific to how United Way of Greater Cleveland looks at things. But I hope some of these will resonate with your experience with the philanthropic sector in your community as well. So best practice driven, how do you know that this is going to work? And if it's something new and innovative, because we love to see new and innovative things, what's the inspiration for it? Or, how is there research that is adjacent to the model that you're proposing that helps you grow your confidence in the fact that this will work? So is it innovative? Cleveland has had some of the highest poverty rates in the nation for more than a decade, for probably about 25 years. And so it's become really important locally to think about what is different than what we've done in the past, because what we've done in the past has really not markedly changed the situation for some Clevelanders. The next two are what is really important with the CHN Legal Aid Partnership is a systemic approach. So how will this impact how business is done? And through our collective advocacy and work with legal aid, there was legislation that was passed that literally changed the way business is done in our Cleveland Housing Court, as well as a holistic point of view. As I mentioned earlier, families are dynamic, individuals are dynamic, and so how are we taking the multiple aspects of their life into consideration? And then the funder relationship. It's really important to pick up the phone sometimes and call your funder or somebody an organization that you want to learn more about their funding priorities, and just ask for coffee. I do that all the time with organizations that I think that we might be seeking funding from in the future. And I get those kinds of calls from organizations that want to learn more about what United Way's priorities are. It's really tough to advocate for a proposal or to advocate for funding if all I've got in front of me is what's on a piece of paper. That relationship is really, truly important, especially when I'm interfacing with our volunteers, who are actually the individuals that make the funding decisions for United Way. And finally, partners. Who else is on board? Who else have you been able to get buy-in from to show that this is not just, again, one organization using its expertise, but a group of organizations or an organization that provides holistic services really thinking about how to leverage a variety of expertise in order to have the greatest impact on those dynamic families that we know reside in Cleveland. And so United Way's work with the Seymour Institute is one example of that, having a relationship with the folks with Al and Barb, who have founded it, and with the folks that work there, Rob and Ryan, as well as leveraging relationships with our local government. And so talking to the county about different resources that they might have available and how we can use those to therefore sustain or better use those or leverage those, whatever the case may be, to ensure ongoing stability of the Family Stability Initiative, primarily in the form of that rental assistance. And so from this last slide, it feels a little bit displaced, but if you take one thing away from it, is if you're thinking about philanthropic funding, pick up the phone and call the person that you think is the best contact to start having that conversation. I wouldn't know 80% of the things that I'm lucky enough to be able to know today if it weren't for the fact that I know that I can pick up the phone and call Kate and ask a question that might sound silly to somebody that does do this work every day. So I just want to echo that. And I think that with that final point, I think the slides are done.
That's great. Thanks so much, both of you, for all of that information. Particularly about relating with funders. That's really helpful. And Kate, one of the things that you mentioned early in the presentation, you talked about how you're collecting data and your rental program with your tenants, who then are, after a certain number of years, potentially able to purchase the home that they've been renting. And that's a pretty long-term effort. And if you could kind of put that together, how the data that you got from that and the information that you get from that is helping in explaining the story of what your organization is doing to funders.
Sure. So I think a lot of times, I mean, it's true across the board that the data really can tell a story. And so when we're applying for funding and we want to, for any of our financial capabilities programs, if we're going to a funder and we're requesting money to support our housing counseling program, we have this track record, this long-standing track record where we can point exactly to what we've been able to do because of our engagement with our residents. I think one of the most helpful things for us is we have a captive audience, which is not always easy to obtain. With some of our other housing counseling programs, it is voluntary on the client's part, and so it's hard to collect that data over time. But I think what set this apart is that we really are able to see a resident's progress. And then we're able to, I think, show that when we take that investment with our residents, so we're spending all of this time working with them to make sure that their long-term sustainability is good, then we see that in other areas too. Their engagement with other programs is better. We have very, very low delinquency rates with our rent payments. And I think part of that is because they trust us. We've built that relationship with them. And then that's just one more thing we're able to add to the picture when we go to a funder is we have the data to really support what we're here saying to you today. And so the data has been really helpful.
And I would just like to add that that is super important from a funder's perspective, and it's probably for Kate a little bit of a double-edged sword because they do such a good job with it. Now sometimes if I just have a question, I call Kate because I know that she can give me more nuanced information about what she's seeing directly from clients that we're all trying to serve. So, again, that goes back to tracking and how you can slice and dice your data to ask, tough or nuanced questions, and again, having that relationship.
Well, thank you both. And I think that we have a few questions.
We do. How do you afford to, let me see. Let's go to Kate and Andrew. How do you afford to pull credit multiple times?
That is a good question. So the nice thing about moving into the Salesforce platform is that there are a few more options when it comes to what vendors you use to pull your credit reports. So a cost of a credit report has decreased a little bit. For our eviction prevention programs, we're only pulling from one bureau, so it is a little cheaper there. We do include the cost of pulling credit reports when we create our budget for the next year and know that when we fundraise, we would need to fundraise the dollars to cover that cost. We are very fortunate that we have some really great local foundations and the United Way that give us a little bit of flexibility in the way we use the funding once it gets to CHN. And then because I am speaking to many housing counseling agencies, we do draw down our HUD grant with some of our credit report costs as well.
Thank you. How many housing counselors do you have on staff, and are they all HUD certified?
So they are not all HUD certified yet. We do have a couple of counselors that have obtained their certification. We tend to go by function here at CHN, and so on our eviction prevention side, we currently have 3 full-time counselors working with those clients. With our resident program, where we are providing the ongoing counseling services, we have two full-time counselors, and then we have one administrative position that really helps them get the data into the system. So essentially, the counselor will meet with a resident. They get the file prepared, and then that file moves over to the administrative assistant, who then goes through and gets all of the data into the system, so that counselors really have time to counsel and do what they're really great at, and not have to worry about, also getting all of their data in, which can be a little stressful because it's a lot when you have to do both.
Thank you. Has FSI 2.0 been repeatable in different communities and populations with different needs?
Andrew might have. Yeah.
So in terms of the way that the right to counsel is structured, so a lot of the other cities that have really paired, this assistance with a right to counsel those programs have been actually operated out of a singular department, either within, the city itself. As far as I know, we're the first city in the country to have structured our partnership in such a way that, United Way is sort of the coordinator, Legal Aid is providing the legal expertise, and then there's CHN that's providing rental assistance and financial coaching. I don't know that any other city has done it that way yet. Our legislation doesn't take effect until July 1st of 2020. And so, part of this will be a 3-year evaluation with the national evaluator. So ask me again in 3 years, and I'll make sure you get the full report as we're continuing to roll this out.
Thank you. Final question. I guess we can pass this out via the chat function to all those on the call, or we can just after the call. But could you share a link to the Arizona self-sufficiency matrix?
Oh, sure, definitely.
Right. That's it for questions.
Okay, so I have a question, and I'm going to aim it at Kate, but certainly Andrew jump in as well. So other cities where counseling agencies are interested in doing this? Do they start with the United Way? Where do they start? And what would you recommend in terms of what the approach is and what the obvious funding places are so that groups could be as successful as possible?
Sure. I would definitely recommend reaching out to United Way, especially because many folks on the call might already be in a city where a SEMER program exists. And so United Way might be able to point those agencies in the right direction. We were lucky at CHN that our flagship program is we're a landlord. So we have our own residents, and we were able to learn a lot from the folks that we were already seeing on a day-to-day basis. And so I would recommend just being familiar with stakeholders that might be involved in affordable housing, the bigger landlords in town, to really understand what the needs are regionally. So what we see in Cleveland might be very different than another location. And so I would recommend then reaching out to United Way, because they would know who is already boots on the ground doing the work. They can put you in touch with the right folks. And then I think for us, what we're seeing is the eviction prevention counseling especially has really become what our foreclosure prevention program used to be. All of our counselors were very familiar working with the court systems, dealing with folks that were going through a crisis. And in this instance, we're just working with, rent payments as opposed to mortgage payments, and the timeline is a little bit different. So I think we've really been able to take learnings from the foreclosure crisis and use those to really build a strong rental counseling program.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Ellie, do you have any more quick things you want to say? We're ready to move on.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so this was terrific. If there's new developments we should know about, please let us know. I think there's a lot of interest in this in the field, and this has been a high value conversation. Thanks for the good work that you're doing. Good. So we will continue in 2020 with our campaign to create more and effective communications around the social media world, and still would like to get your pictures. They're still worth 1,000 words, and please keep them coming. Send them to Ellie. They go into Facebook. We use them. We'll use them at some point in other ventures as well. But as we go in the upcoming year, our ability to be effective in social media is an area that Ellie will be doing a lot of work in, and we'd like to be helpful to agencies around the country. There'll be more about that later in the year, but please keep those pictures coming. So we are, as you know, a membership organization. We had a very good last 2 years, and I know organizations are under a lot of pressure, and really appreciate the fact that all these organizations, we're still getting new memberships in. Lots of groups have re-upped their membership dues. We still have the discount on credit reports. We are looking at a couple other possibilities for discounts that we will, if they come to fruition, we'll roll out. But the real reason to join this is to allow us to do the independent work we're doing, to be advocates in Congress and in the field. So thanks for all the support you've had. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and look forward to talking with you then. Thanks so much.